Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Call Monitoring Strategies. I'm Rachel and I'll be the webinar chairperson for today. We've got a brilliant agenda coming up. Delighted to be joined by one of our webinar favourites, Carolyn Blunt from Ember Real Results. Welcome, Carolyn.
That's very kind of you to say, thank you.
And for people who aren't aware of what Ember Real Results does, if you could just share with us.
Yeah, sure. And I've got a slide when I get into my section, which probably explains it better. But Ember Real Results is a learning and development company that specialises in improving performance in contact centres through people. So we primarily train advisors in sales, customer service. We train team leaders in how to get the best out of their teams. And we rely on quality frameworks and coaching as well as training. So that's where my expertise in this particular topic comes in.
Brilliant. Well, welcome, Carolyn. And delighted also to be joined by Frank Sherlock from Call Miner. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Rachel.
Introduce Call Miner to everyone.
I too have a slide later on that will introduce Call Miner, but very quickly, Call Miner are a company that specialises in engagement analytics. So we allow our customers to unlock the insight into all of those customer interactions across multiple channels. And one of the key value propositions that we bring to bear is the automation of quality monitoring. So today I'll be talking about the non-human aspects or the technology aspects of call monitoring.
Brilliant. I look forward to that. So there is going to be a lot of information. I'm sure you'll want to share the webinar today with your team. We are taking a recording, which will be available about an hour after the webinar on callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. And the slides from all the speakers will be there. But if you're wanting to follow along at the moment, if you sign into our chat room, which is callcenterhelper.com/chat, there is the added bonus of being able to download the slides from both our brilliant speakers today. We've got 54 people already logged in, so lots of chat and interesting conversation going to carry on. And so if you wanted to save that later, it's available to download. This button here will download the chat log. And today, as always, we are offering a bottle of champagne, which I have here, or a box of chocolates for the best tip. Sadly, we can't have chocolate in the office, so it's just the champagne. So we will source that for you. For the best tip, simply write #question if you want to ask any of our panel a question, or #tip to share your tips for call monitoring strategies. So we have been asking, how do you select good and bad calls? I know a few of you have written in. Mostly about kind of using technology, so we'll see a few others. So we'll ask our first poll today, what percentage of call volume do you manually assess? So 0 to 1%, 2 to 5%, 6 to 9%, or 10% plus. I will launch that now. And so Carolyn, what do you think, or Frank, what are you hoping to see?
I mean, obviously technology now, more and more companies starting to use technology, but I still think the penetration of using technology for automated call assessment is still relatively early days in the UK market. I would think 2 to 5 or 6 to 9 would be the favourites here.
Yeah, Carolyn, agreeing?
Yeah.
Or?
I mean, it obviously depends on the duration of your calls, I think, as well as to how many of them you can actually listen to. But I think most people are probably doing anything between 1 and 3%. So I would expect it to be one of those first two options. If people are manually doing 6 to 9% or more than 10%, then that's a heck of a lot of time spent listening to calls by a human and at random. So
yeah, you're right.
So the sample size was 120. So 37% is 0 to 1% of calls. 36% was 2 to 5%. 10% 6 to 9%, and as shockingly 17% is above 10%. Carolyn, wow. Is that something you're quite shocked about?
No, that's kind of what I expected. You know, the bulk of it's come in those lower percentage points. I think if you are one of the people who said you're manually assessing more than 10% of your call volume, then you need to have a chat with Frank, because that's just completely inefficient, you know, in my opinion, a lot of the time.
I can save you a lot of money if you're manually assessing 10% of the calls, because exactly it takes 4 or 5 times the call length to assess a call. So
yeah.
Fab. So we are actually going to do another poll just quickly, which is on how do you select your calls? You know, do you manually select calls? Do you self-selection of calls? Random selection of calls? Selecting short, long calls, long hold time, or are you using speech analytics to select calls? Frank, I'm guessing you're hoping to see a few of the bottom ones.
Well, I'm hoping there's not so many of the bottom ones, because that creates a market opportunity for coal miner. I would think the top 3 may be the lion's share of this.
And Carolyn, what are your thoughts on those? What are you seeing when you're out with call centres?
It varies massively. You know, demotivated team leaders will probably select the shortest ones a lot of the time, you know, because it's just easier and they have a target to hit, which is, you know, quite often like, you know, 3 per person per month, and it's quite arbitrary in that way. I would love to see more being selected by systems and technology, because as we've already said, it's less subjective, but I think a lot of the time it will be manual and random.
Okay, I think you can see my screen because I'll share the results. And 41% is manual, 12% is self-selection, 56% random selection, 20% selecting short, long and long hold time, and 4% speech analytics. Frank, I don't know whether that was something that you were expecting to see.
It's surprising. That I thought maybe it'd be closer to 15-20% on speech analytics, but if the person who is doing 10% of their calls is not using speech analytics, that there is a real problem. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, as I said, that the traditional methods of manual selection, you know, I see more and more self-selection coming in, and random selection. The numbers don't surprise me. There is a huge opportunity for all of the contact centres, as Caroline intimated, to make better use of technology to streamline and make this whole process more efficient, more fair, and more objective.
Brilliant. So I am now going to hide that poll, and delighted to start off our presentations today with Carolyn. I will hand the metaphorical baton over to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Is that okay? I'm just going to put my stopwatch on, just because anyone who's listened to these webinars before will know that I get into, you know, kind of talking a lot, and I know we have a limited amount of time today, so make sure you feel free to stop and interrupt me, Rachel, at any time. So I'm going to be talking about strategies for call monitoring, and just to give you a little bit more background to who I am and where I sit. So I run a company called Ember Real Results, which, as you can see there, is part of the Ember Group. So Ember Services is the main part of our organisation, really. That's the biggest part and the oldest part of our group. And that does customer management interactions, kind of looking at how we improve performance for our clients. So we then often get that data and are able to then go and design and deliver really good training solutions. So we work quite closely with Speech Analytics as a platform for helping us do that. We've also got a law firm and a recruitment company as well, and we're working with contact centres like these. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today comes from my experience in the sector for the last 15 years, but also, you know, the research that's available out there, and my own kind of personal views and opinions about what works. So some of it you might actively disagree with, and that's fine, but if anyone wants to ask me any specific questions as well, I'll happily take those in the chat room after. So I know that you did some research, Rachel, around what you would like from my session, and it came into these main areas. So first of all, thinking about what other contact centres are doing well in the topic of call monitoring, and then thinking about what's the best way we can give feedback without upsetting advisors. So we absolutely want to use call monitoring and quality processes as a way of building our advisors up and motivating them, and not criticising them and knocking their confidence and their motivation down. Is it possible to achieve that kind of improvement through advisors self-selecting and monitoring their own calls? And I absolutely think it is. It's great that we had, I think, 11 or 12% of calls being selected by advisors in that poll just there. And as Frank said, we are seeing more and more of that as a trend, which I absolutely thoroughly endorse, because it means you've got a good culture in your contact centre where advisors are asking, hopefully, for help, not just pointing out the good ones where they've done really well, but particularly useful when they say, do you know what, I think I could have done better on that call, and I'd really like this one to be one that we discuss in our session. So again, also thinking the last part of this about how we can improve in terms of how we deliver compliance statements, especially because you know they get quite repetitive a lot of the time, and it's something that starts to sound really robotic and clunky. So yeah, we're going to give you some tips around that as well. So moving in straight away to what are other contact centres doing well. So there's a number of trends that we're seeing, and the one that I'm really pushing with my clients is to remove administrative tasks from team leaders and give them 80% of their time to focus on managing people. So whether that's about recruiting, specific planners and people to do certain detailed roles within the contact centre, taking them away from being kind of stuck with their nose in their PC and actually getting them out on the floor, visible, and spending time coaching and talking to people. So we did some work with a client recently, and their two busiest days in terms of call volumes were Mondays and Tuesdays, and those were the days when their team leaders were doing a lot of reporting, meetings and various things like that. So it was about, well, how can we restructure this workload and think about the timings of things so that we get our team leaders really visible at the right times. Also removing fixed and scripted approaches to conversations. I get really wound up with certain things that have historically come out as best practice in our industry, which are tick box approaches to quality with statements in them like, is there anything else I can help you with at the end of the call? And the reason why I get so annoyed with that is it gets to a point where if the advisor doesn't say it, they lose 10 points on the Excel spreadsheet where we're ticking a box to say, did they say it? And, in a lot of cases, it's not necessary, or even worse, the customer says, well, you haven't even helped me with what I rang up for. So that's, it's just making the situation worse. And so what we want to do is give our advisors the freedom to think about what is an appropriate way in which to close this particular call. And maybe I've got, a dozen different ways in which I might signpost the close of a call, because that's still a good thing to do. But give me a holistic quality framework that says at the end of that call, did that customer go away feeling clear, satisfied, happy, and not, did I say things in a certain picky kind of a way? It's just not necessary. So introducing self-assessments and peer-to-peer assessments. So we've touched on that briefly in our poll. I think this is really great from a cultural perspective, because the other thing that I get really kind of focused and passionate about is that individual advisors should be driving their own learning and development, and so should team leaders and managers as well. But making them say, do you know what, I want to go on that training course, or I need some more help with this, and not just sitting back and waiting for that to come to them handed on a plate or spoon fed, and actually that they say, yeah, I want some help with this call, or can I help somebody else with that because I'm an expert in that, or I've got the knowledge in this, or I could have thought of another way in which you might be able to do that. And so peer-to-peer assessments are a really great way of advisors learning from each other as well. So I think that's definitely culturally something for us to think about. And then I've touched on this briefly already, so not picking holes in conversations. And the customer's satisfaction is actually the best measure, not even the advisor what they think, the team manager what they think. The most important person in that conversation was the customer and what they think. So are we creating a 360-degree scorecard that actually pulls the transactional CSAT from the customer into that conversation and adds that to the weighting of that overall analysis? So it's not one single person's random manual opinion on a wet, kind of day where they're fed up and, maybe don't particularly like that advisor because they've asked for a holiday at a really inconvenient time, and all this subjectivity that comes into it. We want to take that away. So when we've got some data and we need to give some feedback, what's the best way in which we can do that without upsetting our advisors? First and foremost, ask their opinion before you tell them anything. So how did you think that call went? If you could have that call again, would you do anything differently? And just gauge what they think it was like, and they might actually come out with stuff that you haven't thought about, and they might also be quite hard on themselves. So if you're discreet and supportive with the adjusting feedback that you then give, it shouldn't go anywhere near upsetting them. I think the only reason when it really upsets them is if they are in disagreement with you in terms of the feedback. So that then is you've just gone out of your way to pick my worst call, or you've not taken into account that that customer was really rude to me, or any number of different things, or you've not given me the training and you're telling me to do something that you've not trained me to do, or the system doesn't support me to be able to do what you're asking me to do. So we need to understand what's going on, because most people do come to work wanting to do a good job, and if they are getting upset with the feedback, it's probably because they're showing you that I do care. So we need to think about ways in which we can support them and work with them. So never ever put them down or tell them off or adjust their performance in front of other people publicly. It's always got to be something that's done discreetly. And I always have this thing as well about contact centres, because it's hard, it's an open environment, and if you go book in a room just to give them a small piece of adjusting feedback, it can be like making it into a bigger deal than it actually is as well. So we want to watch that. We want to maybe just grab a coffee, or walk to the sandwich shop with them, have a quick chat in the kitchen before the start of a shift, or catch them at the water cooler, but something that's in the environment that's very kind of natural and calm and discreet. And then just be aware, if you are going to go down the route of adjusting performance, that you equally look for things by which you're affirming them. So I'm not a fan of the praise sandwich, right? I hate it. It's really confusing for people, because you give them positive, then you give them the negative, and then you give them the positive again, and it's like, I don't know whether I've been, kind of patted on the head or kicked up the bum, and I'm human, so I'm just going to focus on the positives. So that tends to get lost. But I think looking for one piece of feedback for every single person, every single day, and dividing that equally, between whether you go for negatives and positives, is a good habit for a team leader to get into. The other thing is to discuss the wider impact of any underperformance. So if you find that advisors are making a mistake, quite often it's because they don't really understand that it's a big deal, that what's the knock-on effect of that. And so if it means that if I enter a product code wrong, or I get a postcode transposed or something like that, it actually causes real inconveniences and cost further down the service chain. We need to put that in quantifiable terms, and we need to give them numbers around that. So over the last month, not just you, but the whole contact centre made this many errors, and it quantified us into this many £1,000, and actually if we had that money to spend on kind of team building days or bonuses or whatever, wouldn't that be good? And actually get them motivated and tuned into doing that. And then lastly, I've completely stolen this from Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's not mine, but I absolutely love it. The book of How to Win Friends and Influence People should be on every team manager's shelf. It contains 30 principles by which you can make friends and influence people, obviously, but it works for leadership and management, it works for relationships, and it's about making the fault seem easy to correct is the particular principle I'm going into here, which is, yes, that's the thing that you've done in the call that needs to change, and we're in agreement about that. And here is how we're going to do it. So we've got some training, or we've got some coaching for you, or we've got something for you to practice, and we've got some tips and suggestions, and it's going to be easy. It's going to be easy. So when you do that, they feel much better about it and much more confident to go and do it. Is it possible to achieve self-improvement through advisors monitoring their own calls? Yes, it absolutely is, as long as they do know what good looks like, because otherwise I might think my call was brilliant and actually it wasn't. So I do need to understand what the gaps might be, but I think most people will, if they're encouraged and shown how to, be able to critique their own calls, as long as, second caveat, there is no significant pay reward at stake, because otherwise, I'm probably going to play down some of those negatives because it's going to affect my pay or whatever other incentives might be connected to it. So we're all just human, right? And last time I checked, we don't pay massive salaries to advisors generally. So that can make a real difference to people. Okay, so thinking now about, how do I make sure that people can self-select effectively and they can actually use what we're talking about here. One of the things that I would say is when somebody's had a negative call and you're asking me to self-evaluate it, I need some space to calm down from that. And I'll show you a graph in a moment as to why I'm saying it. The whole process of self-selection, actually, almost regardless of what they come out with at the end of it, just the fact of hearing their own voice, I don't think we do that enough. Quite often when I speak to advisors, I'll say, when's the last time you listened to your own calls? And they said, I've not listened to them for ages, because even the coaching has gone by the wayside, side-by-side playback's gone by the wayside because we're really busy. So actually my manager scores my calls, 3 calls per person per month, and just sends me an email with the data. And that's not particularly powerful, is it, in terms of learning from it? So some of us are our own worst critics. So again, I might go too hard on that. So it's good to have somebody outside of myself to chat that through with. So that's another key thing that I would suggest we look at. And the reason why I suggest that is this is a graph which shows the more emotionally involved we are with something, the less rational we become. So if I've had a particular difficult call, and it might be that the customer was horrible, or it might be the content of the call was pretty tough, so I do quite a lot of work with police and ambulance services, places like that, health insurance providers, and people have got some really tough stories, and actually the advisor can get quite affected by that. It's hard then to step back and objectively then assess that call for myself. So there's a reason why we always find it easier to look at how to fix other people than necessarily ourselves. And we certainly don't want to undermine their confidence and to make them that inner critic. What we do need to be aware of is that difficult calls can hook emotions, and that's where we need that time for a break and maybe a little bit of step back. Maybe you're going to build some time into this to allow that rational brain to engage. So you'll all know this, if ever you've sent an email in anger and then regretted it afterwards because your emotions have come down and your rational brain's kicked in and you've gone, that probably wasn't the right thing to do. I probably sort of overreacted to that. So we don't want people to overreact when they're self-scoring. So as ironic as this may sound, building in some cool down time into your shrinkage might be something that could have a really positive impact on customer satisfaction and AHT, because we all know that difficult calls take longer. So that's a reason, behavior breeds behavior, everything starts to escalate, the customer gets cross, the advisor gets crosser, and it just goes on, and the AHT expands, or they put them on hold because they just need some thinking time. So actually just saying, you know what, if you've had a difficult call, you can take 5 minutes to just walk around the building, get some fresh air, go and get a drink, whatever. I'm not going to endorse smoking. This is the 21st century. But whatever you need to do to be able to get yourself down off the ceiling and clear the decks ready for the next call will be really helpful. And the thing around this as well is that we're all human. We've evolved from the caveman and woman, and we all have a fight and flight instinct that is absolutely natural to our survival. And even in the 21st century, when there isn't a big brown bear that's going to come and eat you at your desk, your adrenaline doesn't know the difference. It's been hooked because of the confrontation or the emotion, and it doesn't know that you're not going to need to fight or flight. So that's where that calm down time is really important. And if we don't give them that, and we just send them another call, push and a beep in the ear, and there it is, that comes into the next call. And then you get advisors going, why am I getting all the tough calls today? And it's not, it's this kind of repetitive process. So it impacts your quality, your CSAT, your AHT. So my last section is how can we improve the delivery of compliance statements? Number one is keep your compliance statements to an absolute minimum. There's just a thing that I've noticed that can happen sometimes where we start off saying, right, this is the compliance statement as per the regulator or whatever, and then it goes to our legal team and they maybe just secure it up a bit more, and then it goes to our quality team and they maybe kind of add a bit more to it as well, just belt and braces, just make sure we're absolutely covered, and it ends up being a lot bigger and more fixed than it needs to be. So the first thing I say is go back through your compliance statements, have another look at them, think about what could be reduced, get some external opinions on that as well, and then if you can automate as much of that into your IVR, that helps, because that takes it away from the advisor having to say it all the time. But then when you've got it down to the bit that the advisor absolutely must say, then it's about how we lead or bridge into that statement and how we bridge out. So leading into that statement, you can do things where you just literally are signposting to the customer to say, I've got to read you a compliance statement, a legal statement here. So I'm telling you that so that you become aware of why I've gone from being nice and chatty to being maybe a little bit more robotic and formal. So let them know that. So you can say, I just need to read you a short statement for legal reasons. Is that okay? I just need to tell you the following for legal reasons. And then you go into it. Another option is to make it sound as natural as possible. So if you've got it short and then there are bits that your advisors can vary, as long as they say these essential things, then they can have a few different variations of it, and that will help. It's when they have to say it, 50 times a day, and it just becomes, something they can say in their sleep, that it gets really robotic. And then finally, you want to lead out of that, because you need to, again, use a statement, a question or a phrase. Thanks for sticking with me through that. Does that make sense to you? Phew, glad that's done. Let's move on. Because technically as well, if the customer didn't understand it, or the advisor thinks that they put them on mute and didn't pay attention, then we have to repeat it. So by saying to the customer, does that make sense? Did you get that? Thanks for sticking with me. Is that all okay? And getting them to say yes, that's actually really quite good from a compliance perspective. And equally, do you have any questions about what I just shared? No, I didn't. Getting them to say that question. Perfect. So it just helps us kind of bridge in and bridge out in a very clear way. So I'm aware I talked for quite a long time. Just check my time. Yeah, nearly 20 minutes. So I won't say anything else other than thank you very much for listening to that. And that's my Twitter handle, my LinkedIn, and you're very welcome to visit the website, drop me an email, or give me a call.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Carolyn. A lot of information. I know a few questions in the chat room coming through. So before we get onto those, we do have another poll, which I know is one that's slightly controversial. I should take that back off you. So the question we're asking is, do you link outputs of quality to pay or rewards? So it's yes, no, or don't know. Carolyn, I'm not sure what you're hoping to see after your presentation.
In a nutshell, if you're using speech analytics, go fill your boots and link it to pay and reward. If you're not, and you're doing it manually and randomly, don't go anywhere near this, because you're just going to open a whole can of worms, because you're picking a call at random, and you're going to pick my worst one, surprisingly, if it's linked to pay.
Fab. So I will close that and share it. So 54% are saying yes, 41% are saying no, and 5% are saying don't know. Frank, I don't know what your thoughts are on those results.
I'm surprised, as Carolyn said, without using speech analytics, so it's consistent and objective. You are opening the proverbial can of worms, and I think we said before that 4% were using speech analytics, but yet 54% are not using speech analytics, but using the output as an incentive mechanism. That would be slightly worrying for me.
Yep, me too. 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Well, we're now going across to the chat room. I believe I'm already sharing my slides. Everyone see them? Yes. So, Carolyn, we've actually had a question asking what the name of the book was that you mentioned. This is the one with all the how to influence people.
Yeah, so it's Dale Carnegie, and the book is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's 100 years old. It's very American. No offense to coal miner, because they're like historically based in the States, but it's a real classic text. So absolutely recommend having a look at that. I think it's on audiobook as well.
We'll add that to the site. I keep getting confused with there's a film about how to lose friends and alienate people. So.
And that's a pun. That's a pun on the original book. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll make sure I include the right book. So Stephanie's asked, what do you think is a good sample size to calibrate or monitor in a financial sector? Frank, I don't know whether you want to.
I put an answer in the chat room to that, but so let's see if Frank gives the same answer.
My answer would be 100%, because I think it does depend, but the technology opens up the opportunity to be able to monitor 100% of the calls, and that you've got a much bigger pool, therefore, to do really targeted and effective coaching when you're doing it on 100% of the calls. So I would say 100%.
Hopefully you can see my screen. Apparently I wasn't sharing it, so apologies for that.
That was exactly what I typed to Stephanie 16, like 10 to 1 or something when she asked that question. So yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. So we've had a tip in from Eddie, who said, build your live call listening during peak contact times, targeting high interest calls to build up a more accurate representation of your agents. Carolyn, I don't know whether you think that's a good one?
Build your live call listening during peak contact time, targeting high interest calls. Okay.
Well, maybe Eddie, we get you to clarify a bit more about what you mean.
Yeah, what high interest means, but peak contact time is probably the time when your team managers need to be walking the floor and being on hand, and so yeah, you can do live call listening absolutely that way. But then how do you stop that and have a conversation with somebody about what just went on if it's peak time and you've got them in the queue? So you'd have to be a little bit careful, I guess, about that. I don't know. We need to understand that a bit more. But live call listening it does work to some extent, but also if they know you're listening, they do something called the Hawthorne effect, which is where they will put on their best behaviour. So you're not necessarily getting a true representation. And if you're doing it remote live listening, then that's probably better.
Okay, thank you very much. So Eddie's actually also said, make feedback upbeat and positive call quality monitoring shouldn't be reviewed as a negative activity. This will show on calls. So Carolyn, I'm guessing you like that one.
Yeah. Yeah. But you still have to tackle the gaps, right? You can't just paper over them and pretend they're not there.
Fab. So if anybody's got any more tips, remember you can add them into the chat room. Obviously, Eddie is currently in pole position, so there's still time to get them in. We'll come back. So we've got a poll now before Frank's presentation. I'll share this one. which is, do you use speech analytics as part of your quality monitoring process? So I know we said earlier, yes was kind of quite low. So let's see, yes, no, and don't know. Frank, what are you expecting to see?
I'm expecting to see 4% say yes. but then again, there might be people who don't know that said they use quality manual earlier.
Yeah, I think we've also had a few more people coming online. So I will share the results. So 3% say yes now, 93% say no, and 4% say don't know. So
I've got my work cut out to win over the speech analytics, potential speech analytics audience here. So
brilliant. So I think that's perfect to be able to hand it over to you. So I will make you the presenter. Oh, I need to hide that first, sorry. There we go.
I'm waiting for the link to come
sorry,
to me.
Do you know what I was just thinking then, Frank, actually? You know, I possibly stole your thunder in the warm-up about that particular story.
Possibly.
But a lot of people will have missed it. A lot of people will have missed it. So yeah, I think you're safe to say it again.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, just need to go to full screen mode. Ah, there we go. Yep.
Okay. So I guess it's a good afternoon and good morning, because I notice there's some people calling in from the US. There may even be good evening if there's people from Asia Pac as well. So I'm Frank Sherlock from CoreMiner. I think thanks, Carolyn, for that really insightful perspective around the human aspects involved in call monitoring. I'm going to really talk now about the role technology, or specifically automated analytics, can play in quality monitoring. A couple of points that Carolyn made, and I'll make no apologies for repeating them during my presentation, was about removing the admin overhead, let the system select calls for you, using speech analytics to automate scorecards to provide insight for team leaders, agents, and other stakeholders in the organization, and really how speech analytics can help streamline the whole end-to-end QA process to give you this sort of consistent and holistic and objective feedback to your agents and advisors. A little bit about CoreMiner. We've already done this earlier. There's basically really two main components of what speech analytics can do for a company. One is just unlocking all of that insight, market intelligence, etc., that is locked within the interactions. And the second element is to use speech analytics for automated agent monitoring and performance feedback. CoreMiner are an interaction analytics company. We don't do anything else but interaction analytics. We're not a contact center provider. We're not a recording provider. We are a pure play interaction analytics provider. We're headquartered in, as I think Carolyn intimated, American. We're headquartered in Waltham in Massachusetts, but we have offices here in the UK, in Nottingham, and also in Sydney, Australia. So you'll be familiar with this continuum. Well, I hope you'll be familiar with this continuum. Quality assurance is really an iterative process. You measure, analyze, act, and assess the impact of those actions. It's really no different with automated analytics. People often talk to me about automated analytics and say, doesn't that take away the role of the coach? It doesn't. It really streamlines the measurement and the analysis area of this continuum. It provides you with assessment for 100% of the calls. It does this without any subjectivity. Software doesn't have favorites. Software doesn't perform better on certain days of the week or certain times of the day. So it creates really, if you think about using speech analytics, create an environment that you can have more time for better, for fairer, and for more accurate coaching opportunities. That's really the role that speech analytics helps within this process, the measure and analyze to give you more time to coach. So obviously in the polls earlier, lots and lots of people do manual quality monitoring, and manual quality monitoring is a challenge. You know, the actual manual scoring of calls is labor intensive. Typically, and depending on the type of call, depending on the complexity of the scorecard that's being used, or the Excel spreadsheet that's being used, or the system that's being used to log the scoring, it can typically take anything from 3 to 6 times the actual length of the audio conversation to manually score. Because you're doing evaluations on a sample, and we've seen earlier that there's very few of the organisations on this call that do much more than a 5% sample. It's going to be inaccurate, and the assessors themselves can be subjective. There can be a variation of quality between the assessors. We also see quite often calls are selected for monitoring may have occurred at the beginning of the month. The actual assessment may take place at the end of the month, and then the feedback to the agent may take place at some point the month after. So that whole mechanism between when did the call take place and what are the coaching actions required can be really slow and inefficient. Because of this, quite often what we see is that the data or the insight provided within the monitoring doesn't always get translated into meaningful action. In the multi-channel world and the multi-skilled agent, you find that the key data also lives in several different systems: the email system, the web chat system, the recorder system, the text messaging system, the CRM system. All of that data is on different systems, and it needs to be manually aggregated, which creates an even bigger overhead for organizations. So manual quality monitoring is tough and it's difficult. It's also costly. You've got the cost of the monitoring staff. You've got the time that it takes to monitor the call. Caroline mentioned before about agents that will say, you always pick on my worst calls. What my other 99% were absolutely fine. Why is it always a Monday? You always score Frank better than Carolyn on these calls. So that whole recalibration and appeal cycle is also costly, time-consuming, and quite frustrating. So at the front end, though, the agents are really the recipients of ineffective call monitoring. They can feel they've been treated unfairly. They can feel that their worst calls have been selected. The assessor didn't like them. And they know they're being coached on a very small sample of the work. So they can become disengaged. It happens. And there is a direct link between employee engagement, customer experience, and business performance. So if you had a fair, objective, and holistic approach to QA to give to your frontline employees, they will be more engaged. They will be less likely to leave the organization. There's a huge cost associated with agent attrition, and you'll get better business results and improved CX. So what's not to like about this approach? So let's look at speech analytics in a bit more detail. And this, I think, is the power of speech analytics. Just imagine if you could tag every call that was out of compliance, if you could identify the high risk or high performance teams or agents, the behaviors within your calls that lead to good or bad outcomes. If you could guide agents in a much faster feedback loop in either real or near real time, or alert managers to problems in real or near real time. If you could also identify the consumers likely to pay or likely to buy, and also redact any sensitive personal information that may be locked within the audio for PCI compliance or other regulatory requirements. And you could do that for every call, and that's what speech analytics brings to the party. So Carolyn's already touched on this. Let the system handle the heavy lifting of call monitoring and automated scoring. Give yourself more quality time on holistic feedback, so you can do very highly focused coaching between the coach and the agent. I already mentioned the software has no favorites. It always, every call can be scored in exactly the same way. It's completely objective and can be universally applied. Carolyn also mentioned about individuals taking control of the outcomes of their calls. I am a passionate believer that the analytics should not be just the domain of the business analysts or the market intelligence people. Having the ability to feed the analytics feedback directly to the team leaders and the agents is to me, a fundamental requirement within quality monitoring. And also, you have the opportunity to have a coaching session, say on Monday, and then analyze the effect of that coaching session almost immediately on the next day's call, on Tuesday's calls in that case. So it's a hugely powerful capability with speech analytics. But with that, it produces lots of information across lots of dimensions. And I think it's really, really important, and I've seen people make this mistake, that you measure the things that are important to your business and deliver the right information to the right people at the right time, not just deliver the analytics output, you know, across multiple stakeholders in the organization, and 90% of the information that you're providing to them has no value. So for instance, you know, on some of these pictures you see here, you know, your execs might want to see a high level scorecard. How are we doing? How are we trending against some of the key criteria for our organization? Whereas your team leader might want a dashboard to see how the individual agents are performing against the set criteria. The MI team may be more interested in looking at specific trends to see if there's been any positive or negative impact on different days of the week, or whether there's different impacts for different products or different services. So really, if you consider speech analytics as part of your deployment, consider what the recipients need and how you're going to present that information to them. So we talk about extending the results to the front line. This is again, I make no apologies. This is direct this is a direct screenshot from CallMiner's product. Here you've got a supervisor. The supervisors within the customer services department. They've got a scorecard on the left-hand side of the things that matter to them, and the supervisor in this case is looking at agent quality. The supervisor can immediately see, how does customer service compare against the average with other departments? How does it compare with the best? Is my agent quality trending positively or negatively? In this case, the agent quality is trending negatively. The supervisor can see the agents below in the middle of the panel, that on the bottom, the person Benita Chumra has got an agent quality score of 77, doing really well. But on the top, Clarissa Dalloway has got an agent quality score of 22. So the supervisor has an immediate view as to what areas should the supervisor need to be thinking. In this case, perhaps the supervisor would add Clarissa Dalloway to the watch list on the right-hand side and say, I need to keep an eye on Clarissa just to see if that agent quality is, you know, whether they've had some particularly bad calls, whether Clarissa's having a bad day. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll add that to the watch list. So the analytics has given the supervisor control as to what they need to focus on. But it shouldn't stop there, because what would Clarissa Dalloway see? Clarissa would see her agent quality score is 22. It needs coaching. There's some news feeds there to say, you know, agent quality needs coaching. The empathy score is actually pretty good. The empathy score has been great. But what makes up agent quality? Politeness, compliments, ownership, silence, and empathy were the factors selected within this measure of agent quality. And Clarissa can see how she's performing against her peer group. And it's not how she's performing based on the 1% assessment. It's how she's performing based on all of her calls. So it's entirely objective. Therefore, Clarissa can see that she needs to improve her politeness in this case, because the politeness score is, I need to be more polite on my calls. If I'm more polite on my calls, my agent quality will improve. And that really is the power of analytics, is to do, as Caroline said, give individuals some control, allow individuals to self-regulate and self-correct. So, but don't just stop at what the team leaders and what the agent wants. Also think about using analytics to measure customer experience. What do customers expect from a journey, whether it be service, sales, or financial transactions? There's different key metrics that you may want the analytics to measure, so you can measure the effectiveness of that journey. Was it efficient? Were our agents polite? Did we process the call in the right time frames? Did we apply our compliance statements, etc.? So build up a taxonomy of scorecards that you also don't just use analytics to measure the agent performance, use it to measure the customer experience. I guess finally, slide is probably way busier than it needs to be, but this is the QA continuum as applied to speech analytics. So measure is the bottom left, where you set up the categories, the searches, and the scorecards to be populated. Then moving anti-clockwise, the audio is analysed, insights then provided for the agents to act upon, the coaching and feedback assessment sessions take place, and the whole thing is iterative, the whole cycle repeats. So the QA continuum that you're using in your manual scoring is exactly the same with speech analytics. It's just that you're involving different people in the business to affect that continuum. I think I'm just about on time, Rachel. This is my contact details. I could talk for hours about speech analytics, and 10-12 minutes on quality monitoring is but scratching the surface. But if anyone wants to know any more, feel free to email me, to phone me, to connect with me on LinkedIn, to get hold of CoreMiner via our Twitter account, or go and visit our website. There's lots and lots of assets that you can pull down. There's white papers, there's videos, there's other webinars where we've specialized in this topic. There's a wealth of information available on the CoreMiner website should anyone need any more information, or please contact me. Back to you, Rachel.
Brilliant, and we'll make sure that if anybody gets in touch with us, that we pass them on. So we've had quite a lot of questions, so I'll start. So Franz asks, we're currently looking at investing in quality monitoring software for data capture and analysis. Any tips for us to take into account? So Frank, I don't know if you have any tips.
The last slide I showed earlier had my phone number on. That would be a good tip there. Talk to me about the details. No, but seriously, think about what you want analytics to do for the business before you invest in analytics. Be very clear as to what the business pain points are that you want analytics to resolve. Often, analytics will fail not because of the technology, but because people haven't thought through how they want to use it, what the return on investment needs to be for analytics. Like anything else, whether you're buying a printer or some computer hardware or software, there needs to be a return on investment. So think about what you want to do, what the return on investment is for analytics. And I would say that over the last 3 years, the technology maturity, the advancements in things like speech analytics, speech to text analytics. You look at things like Alexa, for example. The technology is there, it's accurate, it's consistent, it's available, but just think about the ROI, think about what you want to do.
Brilliant, thanks for that. So Nick's shared a tip, allow agents to do call monitoring on their own calls, then you can chat about their results versus your results. So we've also had an opinion from Stuart, who said maybe try getting those good agents to coach the not so good agents. Carolyn, I don't know what your thoughts on that one is.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the peer-to-peer piece that I talked about, but you must support those good agents with coaching skills training so that they don't upset or demotivate, demoralize by doing it in the wrong way.
I guess on that one, analytics has a part to play in that. If you can understand what are the behaviors and attributes of the agent pool that lead to good outcomes, and which agents are consistently displaying them, it will allow you to get to that, who are this group of potential coaches, who are this group of potential mentors for the other agents, assuming that, as Caroline said, that they have some coaching skills. So analytics will help you get to what good looks like, and what you should be doing, and which agents you should be using to coach the not so good agents.
Okay. We've had a question sent in from Ahana, who said, is it a good idea to have separate sampling sizes for each advisor based on their previous month's quality score, e.g. for lower sampling size for advisors with higher scores and vice versa? Carolyn, I don't know if you have any feedback?
Well, it makes sense, but it could get into a vicious cycle with it, couldn't you? Where, I had a bad day, and you found that I needed to have a bigger pool of calls listened to, and so therefore you're increasing the chances of finding more faults in what you're looking for, and then equally the converse of that being, I was doing well, and so you're now not looking at so many, so now you're missing the ones where I'm not doing so well. So I could play that game. The best thing is just to let the system do it, and to have the technology listen to everything, and make your ROI on the fact of not spending time and paying people to do something that a machine can do effectively. And I think, a lot of people will have the capability to get analytics either through current platforms or through plugins with Call Miner or whatever they need to do, probably a lot more cheaply than they think. And just having a look in the chat room, someone was saying that the reason why they haven't gone down this route is because their network engineer prefers on-site premise solutions. And why are people like that being allowed to stop the performance of the contact center because they want to preserve their job and polish their piece of tin? And it's just like it's stuck in the 90s.
Although what I would say, Carolyn, is that certainly in Call Miner's case, the software can be consumed either from within the cloud or can be consumed on premise. So if somebody wants on premise instance of Call Miner, we could absolutely do that.
Great. So Dominic said, walking the floor is a thing of the past. Listening in live is possible without the agent knowing you're there. Make use of the technology available in your existing package. It's probably there. Carolyn.
That's what I've just said as well. A lot of people will have it, but don't even know that they've got it. So can we all go back and maybe have a look and make a business case and see what we can do, because it's just fairer for the advisors, isn't it? And it's protecting them as well, because I think there's a cultural piece we haven't actually touched on because of time, but there is this, is Big Brother going to be then listening to me? But actually it should be positioned as it's there to protect you as well, so that we can train you, support you, ensure that you're compliant. And if I had been the advisor who forgot to ask that latex allergy question, my life's ruined. Like, I'm not going to sleep at night for the rest of my life. That's horrible. So yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and one of the big cases we see with analytics is actually reduction in agent attrition, because they feel they're being treated fairly and objectively. They don't move.
Yeah, exactly that.
Well, Nikki said, why aren't people investing in speech analytics yet, Frank?
well, they are. I mean, we talk about the speech analytics is probably the US leads the UK by probably 3 years. So we're relatively early in our cycle here. But if you look at all the various component parts of contact center type solutions, speech analytics as part of that big data piece is one of the fastest growing. Okay, it's growing from a relatively low level, but it's one of the fastest growing components. I would be amazed if within 5 years in the UK that any contact center worth their salt did not have speech analytics.
A dream of utopia. Yes, that would be good.
You've heard it here first. So Nick said, have the team leaders do the call monitoring and then do the QA on the calls. So Stephanie's asked, how do you tackle team leaders that say they don't have time to complete the minimum monitoring required? Admin has been taken away as suggested before. Carolyn, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, give them the tools and the technology to be able to take that excuse away, because it's time consuming. And you know, I've worked with a client whose average call duration, talk time, was 20 to 30 minutes. So you know, it's really hard, and as Frank said, it takes 4 times as long to listen, score, play, you know, you're rewinding, fast forwarding and stuff, whereas actually you can have a machine doing that for you and pushing those dashboards not just to you but to the actual individual as well, and near as damn it real time, rather than 2-3 weeks next Tuesday when we're going to sit in a room. So yeah.
We had a client that without even doing the monitoring, forgetting the assessment and the monitoring, just the selection of the call, you know, we saved 50% of the time that they had to go into the existing system just to select the call to listen to. So you know, there's endless opportunities to improve efficiency and just make team leaders and the agents just happier and more productive.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've run out of time for today, so I'd just like to say, in 1 or 2 words, could you put in the chat room what did you like best about today's webinar? There is a replay and slides. It will be available in about an hour's time on the website on this link. It will be sent out to you anyway, but if you're eager this afternoon, it will be there. So we've got one final webinar next week before our summer stop time on how to reduce customer effort. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to both of our speakers, to Carolyn Blunt from Ember Real Results. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And to Frank Sherlock from CallMiner, thank you also for sharing with us why we should all be buying speech analytics.
Thank you.
And thank you very much from me. Goodbye, everyone.